Bill C-18, an act to implement the Agreement on Trade Continuity between Canada and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We have a variety of witnesses, but before I go to our witnesses, we're waiting for two others to join us. I would just ask the committee, we mentioned that we would confirm how many meetings the committee wanted to have on C-18. Is there any suggestions at the moment as to how many meetings we want to have? Are we 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the committee would like to suggest before I do opening statements? Sorry, does anyone have any suggestions? Do we want to agree to go with 3 meetings on C-18, or do you feel that more is necessary? Ms. Bendayan, yes. Ms. Bendayan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to hear from colleagues from the opposition as to what they would prefer. I recall that at the last meeting, a few of them raised an interest to have a full, lengthy study of C-18. So I'm all ears as to what the suggestion will be, and for my part, I wanted to confirm to the members on committee that the minister is available to appear on I believe what will be our next meeting, February 19th.
Thank you, Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that we do want to have some wholesome input from some witnesses, but at the same time we don't want to be delaying this in any way. So your suggestion of 3 meetings, 4 meetings. If the minister is coming, then we should have a couple of meetings where we've got stakeholders. So somewhere in that range should be able to fit within the timeline.
Any other suggestions or comments? Mr. Blakey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to say that I'm happy to further defer the question until we've heard from a witness or two and kind of get a sense of what some of the extant issues that we want to pursue in respect to the legislation are. But I just wanted to put that on the table, that I don't personally see a need to decide the question right now.
Okay, not seeing any further discussion, then Mr. Blakey has suggested that we put off that decision until the next meeting, though. That next meeting will be the 19th. If everyone is comfortable, we'll hear the witnesses today, and either at the end of today's meeting or on the 19th, we'll decide exactly how many meetings that the committee would like to have. Is that all right with everybody?
Check 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I don't see anybody saying no. So I'm going to assume it's okay. All right, on to our witnesses. Mr. Sheehan is now with us.
Mr. Sheehan, can we do a test sound?
You sure can.
Can you speak for 15 seconds?
Terry Sheehan, check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
Looks
11,
good,
12.
sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, on to the witnesses. So from the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food, we have Aaron Fowler, Chief Agriculture Negotiator and Director General, Trade Agreements and Negotiations. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we should have Christine Roy, Deputy Director, Services Trade Policy, and Shamali Gupta, Deputy Director, Investment Trade Policy, and Doug Forsyth, Director General for Market Access and Chief Negotiator, Canada United Kingdom Trade Continuity Agreement, and Alison Trenholm, Deputy Chief Negotiator, Canada United Kingdom Trade Continuity Agreement, and from Global Affairs, Laurie Di Pier Domenico. So welcome to our witnesses. We will turn the floor over, I believe, to start to Mr. Forsyth, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable members, thank you for the invitation to appear before the Standing Committee on International Trade to address Bill C-18, an act to implement the Agreement on Trade Continuity between Canada and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We thank the committee for its ongoing interest in Canada's trade relationship with the United Kingdom and its attention to this bill to implement the Canada-UK Trade Continuity Agreement, or TCA. In my remarks today, I'll provide a brief overview of the context for the TCA and the highlights of the concluded agreement. My colleagues and I then look forward to taking your questions. So turning to the context for the Canada-UK TCA, as you are aware, the United Kingdom departure from the European Union has had a real impact on our bilateral trade relations because it means that the UK can no longer participate in our existing preferential trade agreement, the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, or CETA. The express aim of the trade dialogue and the trade continuity agreement that resulted was to substantively replicate the CETA on a bilateral basis in order to ensure a seamless transition of our trade relations and seek to avoid potential cliff edges for businesses. While still an EU member, the UK was not legally able to negotiate new trade agreements. However, it could discuss replicating the terms of existing EU agreements as it prepared for Brexit. Therefore, negotiating a transitional trade agreement based on CETA offered the best opportunity for Canada to provide as much predictability and continuity as possible for our stakeholders. However, the exercise to replicate CETA was unlike any other trade negotiation Canada has undertaken. The Brexit process was not straightforward either, as the departure date shifted multiple times and the UK contemplated changes in its post-Brexit trade approaches. For Canada, in order to finalize our trade continuity agreement, discussions with the UK, and reach an agreement that was in the best interests of Canadians, we needed as much clarity as possible. In May 2020, the UK published its most favored nation applied tariff schedule that would take effect when its departure from the EU was complete. And in June 2020, the UK provided formal notification to the EU that it would complete the departure by the end of 2020 without opting for a 1 or 2 year extension where CETA would have continued to apply to the UK. These two developments were key to informing Canada's interests in finalizing the trade continuity with the UK last November. With the ratification process for the TCA trade continuity agreement ongoing and seeking to mitigate the effect of a gap in preferential trading terms where possible, we subsequently signed a memorandum of understanding with the United Kingdom on December 22nd to provide reciprocal tariff preferences on an interim basis. It is important to note that these mitigation measures by way of duty remission orders by Canada and the UK cover trading goods only. Only the ratification and implementation of the TCA will provide the certainty that stakeholders are currently seeking, as well as coverage across both goods and non-goods areas as replicated from CETA. Turning to the Canada-UK TCA texts, in reference to CETA replication, you will see that TCA incorporates the CETA by reference into a short-form treaty format and identifies the necessary modifications to the CETA provisions in the annexes to the short-form treaty. As such, in conjunction with the CETA. In most areas, TCA is a replication of the CETA, which means it is therefore a known quantity to stakeholders, provinces and territories, exporters, and to members of Parliament. A small but important list of chapters, including intensive negotiation to turn the CETA obligations into Canada-US and Canada-UK obligations. For these areas, we undertook targeted consultations with stakeholders in those implicated sectors and kept them informed of developments. In addition to providing stakeholders with updates on progress throughout the trade dialogue, we have also been keeping provincial and territorial representatives informed via the Committee on Trade, or as we call it, CIIT. What we heard from both groups was a strong interest in ensuring continuity of our trade relations with the UK and the ability to return to the negotiating table to discuss a future FTA that would be tailored to the bilateral trade relationship. I'll now outline some of the highlights of the TCA. So in goods market access, the TCA carries forward 100% of CETA tariff elimination commitments, immediately eliminating tariffs on 98% of Canadian exports to the UK. Canadian exporters across all sectors, agriculture, fish, and seafood, non-agriculture, will benefit from continued preferential access to the UK market with access to the same tariff rates as they have to the EU market under CETA. For tariff rate quotas like CETA, Canada maintains duty-free quota access for 8 Canadian agriculture and seafood products that are subject to transitional or permanent tariff rate quotas, or TRQs. The agreement provides commercially meaningful access for all Canadian products subject to transitional and permanent TRQs. In addition, under the TCA, the TRQ administration process was streamlined for beef, pork, and wheat, these exporters will no longer face import licensing requirements and will have access to the UK market through a first-come, first-served system. With respect to supply management under the TCA, Canada made no new market access commitments for cheese or any other supply managed products. Canada has agreed to a temporary outcome that will provide continuity to the UK's access under Canada's WTO cheese tariff rate quota until December 31st, 2023. Total amount of market access Canada provides for cheese remains unchanged. With respect to rules of origin, the TCA allows for accumulation with the European Union. In other words, materials sourced from the EU that are used in the production of goods in Canada or the UK will count towards the originating status of those goods for purposes of Canada-UK trade. The TCA includes origin quotas with the same volumes as CITA for trade in textiles and apparel and for certain seafood products. The origin quota volumes for certain agriculture and seafood products, as well as for motor vehicles, have been revised, but remain significantly higher than recent Canadian exports of these goods to the UK. Provision on accumulation with the EU and the origin quotas are set to expire in 3 years unless Canada and the UK agree to extend them. Without the ability to accumulate with the EU, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for many UK goods to qualify for preferential treatment under the TCA. This provides a real and meaningful incentive for the UK to negotiate a subsequent FTA with Canada within 3 years of entry into force. The areas that I've just covered are currently in effect via the duty remission orders and the MOU that is in place on an interim basis. Now, these provisions are not in place. So cross-border trade and services, with respect to cross-border trade and services, the TCA fully preserves the benefits of the CETA and includes key obligations such as non-discrimination and market access. TCA will continue to guarantee comprehensive access to the UK for Canadian service providers, which remain among the best commitments that the UK has ever signed with a trading partner. As with CETA, the TCA also ensures Canada maintains flexibility to take measures regarding sensitive sectors such as health, public education, and cultural industries. The investment chapter is a technical replication of the CETA. Canadian investors will continue to enjoy the right to establish, acquire, and operate investments in the UK on an equal footing with domestic and other investors. Investment obligations are carefully formulated such that Canada and the UK fully preserve their right to regulate in the public interest, including through exceptions and reservations. However, the replicated investment disputes resolution provisions will be suspended upon entry into force of the TCA, pending a review by the parties, which is to commence 3 months after entry into force. The purpose of the review will be to consider the approach to investment dispute resolutions that best reflect the bilateral relationship between Canada and the UK. With respect to government procurement, Canadian suppliers will have guaranteed and predictable access to all opportunities to supply their goods and services to all levels of government in the UK, including regional and local governments, bodies governed by public law, for example, hospitals and universities, as well as a number of entities operating in the utilities sector and public services. The UK market access commitments under the TCA is estimated to be worth approximately 118 billion Canadian dollars. So looking forward, a subsequent negotiations clause in the TCA commits Canada and the UK to enter into new trade negotiations within a year of entry into force and to strive to conclude a new agreement within 3 years from the TCA's entry into force. The government will undertake public consultations with Canadians ahead of any formal launch of subsequent negotiations with the UK and fully intends to follow the revised policy on tabling of treaties in Parliament with regard to a new comprehensive FTA initiative. Along with my colleagues here today, look forward to your questions and our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth. Mr. Fowler, did you have opening remarks that you wanted to give?
No, Chair, I will be here to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank you all very much. We appreciate that. Okay, on to the committee questions. Mr. Abatai for 6 minutes.
Good morning or good afternoon to all. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Forsyth. The first question, have you began the official negotiation for the comprehensive trade agreement with UK?
Sorry, the new proposed bilateral agreement, is that what you mean?
Yes, I'm talking about the comprehensive agreement, which is supposed to be the next chapter after
the next chapter.
MOU.
That's right. So we have not begun those negotiations, not yet. We need to complete our domestic process in order to ensure that the TCA is in place. And then after that, we will have consultations in terms of with the Canadian public and with others with an interest, stakeholders, provinces, territories, etc., to determine what we would seek in a bilateral negotiation with the UK.
Speaking of which, what were the main concerns since you're doing your domestic consultation, if we frame it that way? What were the main concerns of the industry stakeholders or the general stakeholders in Canada as the negotiation began, and for the transitional agreement? And what are they going forward? What have you feel from the industry stakeholders and from all stakeholders as far as this whole agreement?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And so certainly, I think one of the things that we've heard from stakeholders for more than a while is the need to, as we were negotiating the trade continuity agreement, was to ensure stability and certainty in the UK marketplace, and that was goal number one. Once we got past that, I think what we started to hear more from stakeholders was the desire to improve our market access, especially for key exports, and particularly in the agriculture sector, where we tend to hear from those stakeholders quite often. And it'll be no surprise to the committee. We heard from similar witnesses that there is a desire by agriculture and other stakeholders to see improved access into the UK marketplace, and to make sure that access that we do negotiate is achievable. I think that's the other key thing that we have heard from stakeholders thus far. I would, as we haven't started the consultations, I think that certainly there's been an increased interest in the UK marketplace, but no one has submitted anything formal or in writing in terms of what they would like to see in terms of the next steps. As I said, I do speak with stakeholders quite frequently, and they have indicated that they were reasonably pleased with the certainty that we were able to achieve with the TCA, and they do look forward to improving whatever market access outcomes that we can get in the bilateral context in the next negotiation.
The question that it will come at this time is: do you see that any vaccine supply will be affected by this whole CIIT that we're looking at right now, and from the Parliament side? Have you thought of that?
Certainly, it's thank you for the question. Certainly, it's top of mind for everyone in the government right now. It is a very important issue. So we have been thinking about it. Trade and pharmaceutical products is covered by the CITA, is covered by the TCA. Will be covered by the TCA when it is in place. So I don't foresee any problems one way or the other in terms of the trade agreement not covering those goods.
So the European Union ban on exporting the vaccine, although we have the CITA in place, did that decision surprise you at all?
Well, did it surprise me? I think like as was expressed earlier this week by both the minister and by my assistant deputy minister, I think it was disappointing. I think that we're doing our best to work with our European counterparts to make sure that these bans do not go forward. We're also looking at continuing our internal analysis to see what we can do, to see if there are other ways that we can work with the Europeans to make sure that they are to mitigate any of these risks.
Would you think of any provision or any change or amendment to working with toward the future agreement or the comprehensive agreement to prevent this from happening in the future? I don't think there's anything. To the best of my knowledge, there is
we have not come up with to date any provisions that we could put in the agreement that would prevent what they're doing. I think as was discussed earlier this week, what they're doing is consistent with their, seems to be at least consistent with their WTO obligations, as well as their obligations under the CITA. I think as we look to the future, are there ways that we might want to think about things that we could do? Well, I think we're all hopeful that there will not be another pandemic in our lifetimes. I think that would, but other means to address that, there could well be.
Thank you, Mr. Forsyth. On to Mr. Sheehan for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and an extra thank you for doing such a good job in landing us this far. In December, you were able to get us to this point where, it was just referred to us by Parliament. And during this pandemic, I'd be remiss if I just didn't compliment you for doing that. Now, the 98% tariff lift is quite amazing, and you have indicated in your reports that over the next little while we'll get to 99%. So, through you, Madam Chair, to our presenters, what kind of businesses will benefit? Did we do any analysis on potential jobs that will be protected and created because of your work and this agreement?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And we did, an analysis that shows where the benefits that will flow to the Canadian economy overall from the trade continuity agreement. And just a reminder that it is about continuing the trade that we had between Canada and the United Kingdom. So it's about preserving those market access gains, preserving those exports, preserving all the employment opportunities that we already had in place. So I think it is clear from that analysis that the continuity agreement does exactly that. It provides that kind of continuity that businesses and exporters are looking for. Provides the continuity that exporters or companies that produce quality products and export them to the United Kingdom as well as the European Union. That's the kind of process that keeps people employed in Canada. So absolutely, the work has been done internally, and the report is there for folks to view.
On the flip of that question, obviously, we have the positive side of it, but are there any? And I think you kind of referred to it in your remarks, calling it the edge of the cliff. If you could delve into where. And the reason why I asked that in particular, because we want to see where the jobs that are not only maintained but created, but in particular throughout the regions, whether it's a COLA or DEC or FedNor up here, or FedDev or WD or the new BC Regional Development Agency, and what businesses are supported, but where might be the businesses that are not covered, and what kind of that cliff that you're talking about, or any kind of jeopardy, because we'd have to prepare to make sure that we're able to support any of those particular businesses that may, the 1% or the 2%, if you will. So if you could expand on that for me, please.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And I think it speaks to really the success I think that we've had with our increased exports to the European Union under CITA, and then that we wish to continue with for the UK. And the cliff edge that I referenced was very much around at the end of 3 years, and making sure that we have making sure that we have the agreement in place and that we're able to take advantage of it to the fullest extent possible. And I think what we saw as we were approaching the December 31st deadline was if there was no TCA in place, the big impact that would have on agriculture exporters as well as fish and seafood exporters who would have been subject to the MFN tariff rates that would be applicable in the event that we had no preferential arrangement in place. So we're very pleased that we were able to negotiate that and to get everything finalized. And then in order to take advantage of the agreement in full, we have to get past ideally we'll get the TCA ratified and then an entry into force date in the foreseeable future, so that not only can our key goods exporters take advantage of it, but that our service exporters can as well. And that we can continue to have our business people can continue to enter the UK marketplace and on the service side of things, and as well as to create new business opportunities and seek out new investment. So I think that's the key, is to have the entire agreement in place and not just the goods aspects applying.
And then a short comment, Mr. Sheehan.
No, I was going to delve into something a little more. I guess I would just like to again thank you for your hard work, and I'm sure some people will ask the questions that I wanted to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. On to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses for coming. I had a question, first of all, to the officials related to the implementation of this agreement. Concerning the ratification process, we've heard a call for ratification. What plan has been accepted? Will implementation take place immediately following ratification by the two parliaments, or will it be done later, at a later date?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And the ratification process will follow its domestic course, both here in Canada and in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is a little bit closer to they have finalized their ratification process this week. So once Canada has done that, there will be an exchange of letters between both governments to indicate that all of the domestic processes have taken place and that we are ready to agree on an entry into force date. In order to do that, we will have to finish our domestic process, and this is an important part of it. So we'll do that, and we will take the time that we need to do that, and then once we have completed that and Parliament has done its work, then we'll be able to move forward with the next step, which is very much about indicating to the United Kingdom that we have completed our process, and that we will formally notify them, and then we can decide on an entry into force date.
So the date will be set after ratification, not immediately. Another question.
That's right.
Good. Another question. The UK recently announced that they will be officially asking to join the Trans-Pacific Commercial Treaty. We know Canada is part of it, with some countries of the Asia-Pacific region. Does Canada intend to simultaneously negotiate its permanent agreement with the UK at the same time as it negotiates the UK's joining the Trans-Pacific Agreement as well?
Yes, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And yes, we were in. The United Kingdom had indicated to us both mostly informally, but they had made a number of pronouncements that they would seek to join the CPTPP, or the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. This week, they made an official announcement, I believe it was on Monday, that they would be pursuing the application process for that agreement by sending a letter to each and every CPTPP member. So I think we're still in the early days of our analysis, but I think our plan is to, yes, go forward with both a bilateral negotiation in parallel and the process for the United Kingdom to go forward with their CPTPP in parallel with the CPTPP. That's correct.
Donc, parallèlement,
So at the same time, there will be no different discussions regarding those agreements. As you know, first of all, Madam Chair, how much time is left? How much time do I have left before I move on to another question, which may require a longer answer? 2 minutes? Perfect. As you know, the CTPP, when it comes to the Canadian market and dairy products, it's something that hurt our dairy industry. So the trade agreement that leads to losses every year, as was calculated by different groups like the Quebec dairy producers. Now, the quotas that apply to dairy products are almost the same in the CTPP as in the TPP. The US was part of that initially, then they withdrew. So the quotas were introduced. They were based on the fact that the US was part of the agreement, and that was the fight of the last agreement to eliminate the supply management system. Right now, part of the quotas are not being used, given the absence of the United States. So it's difficult as well for remote countries to export dairy products. We know that the UK, this time around, in the temporary agreement, also wants to export more cheese. Is there a risk if the UK joins the CTPP and take up the quotas that are not being used because of the departure of the United States?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And when the UK officially goes through their application process, they will be required to meet the standards, the high standards that the CPTPP members have already agreed to. There will be a bilateral market access negotiation, and in parallel, as I had mentioned in my previous question, we would continue with the bilateral negotiations with the UK on a parallel track. Yes, the quotas are for the CPTPP have been in place since that negotiation. They would not be expanded with any new members if they were to come on. The government has been clear about that in terms of no new market access for supply managed products coming into the Canadian marketplace. So, and I would just turn to my colleague from Agriculture Canada to see if he had anything he wanted to add there.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. I agree with what's been said so far. I think Canada's commitments with respect to supply managed products, including dairy products under the CPTPP, is well known. Those commitments were made with an expectation that market access would be utilized by our trading partners that are in the CPTPP, as was described. Presently, owing in part to the fact that the United States has not ultimately joined that agreement, there are dairy products for which the utilization rate of the TRQ is not being fully utilized right now. But the expectation was that volume would be used, and the approach that the government took in its discussions of compensation with the dairy sector assumed full utilization of the commitments that were made in the CPTPP. So while the terms of the UK's accession would need to be determined with the UK and the other CPTPP members, were they to take some portion of that dairy access that Canada provided, that would not fundamentally change, I think, the outcome that Canada anticipated when it concluded the CPTPP negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler. On to Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Elsewhere on the Hill this week, the Minister of Procurement, Minister Anand, testified that she had asked all of the companies that are producing vaccines for the right to produce domestically, and that she had been told no. One of the things that CIIT did was reinforce the intellectual property protections for pharmaceutical companies. The TCA does that by extension. I'm wondering if that experience with these companies who have seen their intellectual property rights protected in many trade agreements, including CETA and this TCA, the experience of them refusing Canada the opportunity to produce domestically has caused the government and you particularly, Mr. Forsyth, to rethink Canada's willingness to use trade agreements to reinforce the intellectual property rights of giant pharmaceutical companies when they so clearly are not interested in assisting Canada, even in the midst of a crisis like this.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think it's, you know, the experiences of this week, as you already know, have caused a lot. Certainly, a lot of people have turned their mind to different aspects of the procurement process. There has to date been no further analysis in terms of what the IP aspects are of that. Doesn't mean that there won't be in the future, but I'm not aware of any that has happened this week as of yet.
Well, generally speaking, I mean, isn't the experience sufficient to provide some reflection on the wisdom of providing a lot of additional power and leverage to private multinational companies over and above governments that are democratically elected and expected to regulate in the public interest in the context of these agreements? I think the vaccine rollout is a clear example where the additional power that's been conferred to private companies within agreements like this can be at odds with the public interest. And so isn't it an obvious conclusion from that Canada should be a lot more wary than it has been in the past about solidifying that power that those companies enjoy within our international trade agreements?
Well, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think that the IP chapter, both in CETA and here in the UK, includes the obligations of protection and enforcement. How far we want to go in the future, I think is open for discussion. I think as we look forward in the consultations for the Canada-UK bilateral negotiation, I think that will provide other stakeholders and others with all kinds of opportunity for their views. I think it will be an important opportunity for the government to engage on that topic and others, and look forward to certainly hearing what others have to say about that.
On the same question as to the ways that agreements like this are often used to shore up the power of multinational corporations as opposed to the powers of democratically elected governments with a responsibility to the public interest, one of the other ways that it's done is through investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms. And one of the things that I note about this agreement, it's been said many times in different ways. I think I thank you for the accuracy of your comment today that the ISDS provisions of CETA are suspended. I've heard some members of government say that they're not in there, which of course isn't true. But these do reappear. And one of the mysteries to me about this is that we've heard some very strong statements from the Deputy Prime Minister during the CUSMA negotiations about the problems with ISDS provisions and the pride that she felt personally at having them removed from CUSMA. Now, we have before us a document here that if nothing else is done within 3 years, provided that it's ratified in CETA, we would see similar kinds of investor-state dispute settlement provisions enter into force in this agreement that we're being asked to ratify today. And so I'm wondering how it is that if it is the position of the Canadian government, and I've heard with some good authority that the UK government has not made ISDS provisions a priority, or perhaps even asked for them at all in its, not just in its negotiations with Canada, but generally as they negotiate a lot of agreements. How did this even get in here? Like, wasn't this an opportunity for Canada to just move along from the ISDS question? Who is it that wants to see these provisions in here? And why, if Canada is of the view that these kinds of provisions have no place in trade agreements, and if the UK is not asking for it, why would we bother with a 3-year review? Why wouldn't we just get rid of it in this very agreement instead of preserving it and continuing to ask the question and having a default mechanism that they come into effect, rather than requiring a proactive affirmation of them by Parliament in order to actuate these ISDS provisions?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And I think that one of the key reasons why these provisions are in the agreement is that this was a replication exercise. So we were looking to replicate what we had in CETA. There were a number of discussions we had with our counterparts from the UK about changes to the agreement, and it was, I think, clear from fairly early on in the process that we were talking about replication, that we needed to replicate the agreement in whole. So that is what we did. That's what and as you rightly, as the MP rightly pointed out, there are provisions that the provisions of the ISDS will not enter into force once the TCA is in place, and there will be the opportunity for both parties to discuss what could replace the ISDS provisions, and there will be the opportunity for that discussion. I think it's one of the opportunities would be certainly to decide in a bilateral context how or if the ISDS provisions could apply, but that will be part of the ongoing process.
I guess just in quick follow-up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Blakey, that your time is up. On to Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Forsyth, for being here in front of this committee again, and for the other witnesses. I just wanted to expand on my colleague, Mr. Albutai, for his questioning. So, I mean, as we know, the EU has put in these export measures on COVID-19 vaccines. And so if Canada were to sign a contract to procure COVID-19 vaccines produced in the UK, would this Canada-UK trade continuity agreement ensure these contracts were honored? Or is there still a risk of export controls, to prevent vaccines or PPE or other types of medicines from getting on Canadian soil?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Once we have the TCA in place, as I have noted a couple of times, it is a replication of the CETA, so the CETA provisions would apply. There's nothing in the TCA. We continue to examine both the CETA and the WTO to review what recourse we might have for the export restrictions, but that does not appear to be any. We have not yet seen anything in either of those agreements that would prevent what has taken place. No.
Okay, well, we've known for a while that the UK was interested in joining the CPTPP, and you've alluded to that a few days ago on January 30th, they formally applied to join. And we know that this could change timelines for tariff reductions compared to the Canada-UK Trade Continuity Agreement. So specifically in the UK's press release, about joining the CPTPP, they specifically cite that for cars, they would reach 0% tariff rate for Canada by 2022 in the CPTPP, which is 2 years faster than under the Canada-UK Trade Continuity Agreement. So can you table for the committee any side-by-side comparisons of differing rate, tariff rate schedules between the Canada-UK Trade Continuity Agreement and if the UK joins the CPTPP?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And yes, I think we certainly could table that. One thing I would just caution in terms of comparing the two, especially around automotive goods, but not necessarily exclusive to automotive goods, is that in order to qualify for a zero duty or a preferential duty rate, you would have to meet the rules of origin for those products. It's not clear to me, I haven't examined it in detail, but it's not clear to me that the United Kingdom would be able to meet those rules of origin under the CPTPP requirements. There are provisions within the Canada-UK TCA that allows for European so materials and labor from the European Union to count as originating in the context of Canada-UK. Those provisions do not apply in the context of the CPTPP. So, as I said, it's not clear to me that the automotive production in the United Kingdom would be able to meet the test and to pass the test, I guess, for the rules of origin in the context of the CPTPP and qualify for that zero duty rate.
Okay, thank you. Now you had mentioned the public announcement, but also that that we had heard, or that you had heard earlier, that the UK was looking at joining the CPTPP. And so, on what date did you or your department were they notified that the UK was formally applying to join this agreement?
Well, we have thank you for the question, Madam Chair. We've heard on a number of occasions informally, both at my level, at my colleagues who deal exclusively with the CPTPP, at their level, of the interest of the UK in joining. My understanding is that Secretary of State Truss has mentioned it, noted a few times as well to Minister Ng. And so the exact date, I'm not sure, but it has been mentioned more than a few times, and as you pointed out, that there was the official announcement on the. Did you say the 31st? I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth. On to Mr. Aryayev. Aryayev for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last year, we had heard concerns from Canadian exporters that most of the goods that were landing in the UK had their final destination somewhere else within the European Union. Since December 31st, have you heard of any issues faced by Canadian exporters whose goods are landing in the UK, but the final destination is somewhere else in the Europe?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And yes, we had heard that could be a concern for Canadian exporters. The logistics route for many Canadian shipments were first to land somewhere in the United Kingdom, and then for the load to be broken up and then transshipped on throughout the European Union. Similarly, a number of Canadians would ship to Rotterdam and then break up the load and send it on to the UK, depending on the product and where it was shipped from. What I can say about that is that if anywhere, you can't do that anymore, is what we're discovering. So that logistics routes will have to change. There have been, I haven't heard it directly about Canadian companies, but certainly the challenges that exporters are having as with regards trade between the United Kingdom and the European Union are well known in the press. Once a good lands in the United Kingdom and enters the customs territory of the United Kingdom, it is that's where it belongs. And if you were to ship it from there into Europe, you would have to pay duty on it. And if I could just add, sorry, that our trade commissioners in the United Kingdom, in London, and elsewhere in the United Kingdom are working closely with Canadian exporters and to mitigate any of those challenges and difficulties that they might be having, but we have not heard directly about any to date.
The bilateral trade agreements is good for any Canadian exporter exporting to that particular country, or any Canadian importer importing from that particular country. However, for Canadian companies which are part of a supply chain, and if the country is UK may be separate from European Union, but it's still geographically part of Europe, and it is part of the supply chain. So a Canadian company which is part of the supply chain with the goods traveling back and forth between UK and other parts of European Union, having to deal with a separate bilateral agreement and a multilateral agreement with the European Union, has it added to the complexity, or have you heard any issues faced by any Canadian company on this?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And again, we have not heard directly from any Canadian companies about this as of yet, but yes, there is no question that the supply chains either into Europe, final goods coming out of Europe or coming out of the UK, those supply chains have been directly impacted by Brexit and by all of the challenges that the UK leaving this single market and the customs union have caused. There's no doubt about that. Paperwork has increased. Complexity of transactions has increased as well. We're following it very closely to see if there are any impacts on Canadian companies and what those might be. But again, to date, we have not heard of any. I'm not aware of any direct impacts.
1 minute remaining, Mr. Raya.
Okay, a short question. With the UK coming out of the European Union, we having a separate agreement, has it made any impact on any investments, FDI inflows or FDI outflows?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think again, it's a month in. We haven't. I haven't heard directly about any impacts on investments either here in Canada or in the UK. But it's something that we will follow closely. We'll continue to follow closely, and may be able at some point in the future could be able to report on that.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
I would like to come back to my last question. If I understood you well, we didn't have enough time to hear the longer answer. I understood Mr. Forsyth's answer and Mr. Fowler's answer. So the negotiators cannot reopen the supply management process. Let me come back to quotas that were not used. Those quotas were not used. Other countries have decided not to invest in those areas. We know that the UK has the intention to do so. So is there no danger there if that were to happen? What can we expect about that? What could be the impact on our market?
I think I might turn to my colleague at Agriculture Canada to respond.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the question. Again, the market access that Canada committed to provide in the context of the CPTPP was a negotiated outcome with the CPTPP and TPP members who negotiated that agreement. Our expectation at the time that we made those commitments was that that market access would be available for our trading partners to pursue, and that we could anticipate imports on the lines that we made commitments on. Ultimately, the countries that have moved forward with implementing and ratifying the CPTPP are not identical to the countries with whom we negotiated the agreement. And so in practice, some of the products for which we made market access commitments in that negotiation have not been fully utilized thus far under the agreement, which is not to say that they will not be utilized in the future. But our assumptions have been from the outset that utilization of the TRQs was a likelihood that comes with opening up that market access. In the event that the United Kingdom were to accede to the CPTPP in a way that allowed them to access Canada's supply management tariff rate quotas, then there is a possibility that they would export on those lines and that those exports would either replace the exports of other CPTPP countries that are currently selling into Canada, or for products that are not fully utilized right now might result in additional incremental access into the Canadian market, but not beyond the commitments that we've already made within the commitments that we've already made. And so I think the situation that you're describing is one that we've anticipated. We would work closely with our sector stakeholders, as we always do, to identify any particular concerns arising as a result of the UK's ability to access those particular TRQs. But from the standpoint of today, I think the situation is one that is well within the scenarios that was contemplated by the government at the time that that agreement was concluded. And we will continue to work with our sector to make sure that the impact on them is also what was anticipated at the time that the negotiations were concluded.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fowler. On to Mr. Blakey, please.
The Canada-UK Trade Continuity Agreement is about a 5-page document. Article 5 is the article that deals with investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms. So it represents about 25% of the work done, or 20%, I should say, the work done in order to conclude the agreement. Now, am I really to believe that, like, you know, if we charge out all the hours that people on both sides of the pond spent negotiating this full page of text that represents, as I say, about 20% of the agreement, sounds to me like taxpayers in Canada and Britain will have paid thousands of dollars to keep the door open to being sued for millions of dollars just because of the inertia of a previous agreement when neither government sitting at the table wanted investor-state dispute settlement clauses in the agreement? Like, does that sound like good value for money?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I would just come back to my earlier answer when the goal of the exercise that we completed with the United Kingdom was to replicate what was in the CITA. It was changes were not made for the most part, except for in areas that we had to, for example, in the areas of goods TRQs, which could
but
not
some
be
changes,
replicated.
if I may, like some changes were made. So this document is 25% longer in order to talk about a provision that I understand neither government cares to include in a successor agreement, because our government has said clearly they don't support ISDS provisions. The UK government hasn't asked for ISDS provisions. So why would we have an agreement that's 25% longer just to include something that neither government wants?
I might turn to my colleague who worked on the ISDS provisions for that to follow up.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. The investment chapter outcome that we have in the CUSMA is really a reflection of the unique North American context. And while under CUSMA we don't have ISDS with the US, we still maintain ISDS with Mexico under the CPTPP. And
so how does that square with the Deputy Prime Minister's comments, who said she was really proud that the government got rid of ISDS in CUSMA? Is it the position of the government that they want ISDS chapters in future trade agreements, or is it the position of the government that they don't?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think Canada maintains the flexibility to negotiate variable outcomes with respect to our various partners on ISDS, and we would determine whether or not we would be seeking ISDS on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta. On to Mr. Law, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for everybody for being here today. My first question is, it's in regards to edible beans, white beans. It's a little bit of a sharp cut for a turn from what we've already been talking about today, but what do you see? I know we have quite a bit of success here in Southwestern Ontario shipping white beans, edible beans to the UK. Is this the status quo going forward? Did we do any better? And are we looking at anything else going forward in the long-term free trade deal?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think our exports of pulse crops in general have been excellent. I'm not sure of the exact HS code that is in question right now, but I can say for sure that the exports to both Europe, United Kingdom, as well as around the world, that have been outstanding over the last few years, and certainly what was available to us in the CITA is now available to us in the UK context of the UK TCA. So I would expect that those exports, those strong exports, would continue. And I'll just ask my AFC colleague if he wanted to add anything there as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I agree with what's been said so far. That is an important export crop into the United Kingdom. I think it was one of our top 2 or 3 exports, agricultural exports into the United Kingdom in 2019. And the CITA outcome for that product was carried over into this TCA.
Okay. What about in pork? I know the access into Europe has been dreadful. And I think it mainly hinges on testing for trichinella or trichinalia, however you pronounce that. What's our prospects in pork trying to gain some access into the UK for pork? Is it 0, or do we have great prospects here if we can get over trichinella? How do we get past this?
The pork outcome, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. The pork outcome that we were able to achieve in the Canada-UK TCA is reflective of the potential of the bilateral trade. There's no question that there have been more than a few challenges in terms of accessing the European Union marketplace, both on the pork side and on the beef side. Those are key outcomes. There are a number of our key agriculture stakeholders very concerned with the inability to access those markets, and we share their concerns. Those were important outcomes that we negotiated both agreements. Just on the pork side, so we do have a TRQ similar to what we do under the EU, except it's just resized, so it's about a little bit less than 6,000 tons of
sorry, Mr. Forsyth. Fair enough. The issue hasn't been the TRQ, as you all know. It's the issue around trichinella, I'm pretty sure. So is there any discussions on the fact that there are no cases, there have been no cases, there is no risk to the British population about this? So is there any hope in sight for us to get over this issue?
Well, that's where I was going. Thank you for the question, the clarification. That's where I was going with some of the SPS issues that we have to deal with in the UK, or sorry, the EU, that may not be necessarily translated over to the UK. It will take some time for them to get their own domestic SPS provisions in place to perhaps modify them as they do their own domestic consultations and move forward. So I think there are some opportunities there. They're not going to be in the short term. It's going to take a little bit longer, and we'll have to see. But I don't know if my colleague from AFC wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Agree with what's been said. I think the outcome on pork is a positive one for the sector. We have had non-tariff challenges to accessing markets in Europe in the past. This agreement maintains outcomes that will allow Canada to work with our partners in Europe to improve the access beyond the tariff for Canadian red meat exporters. Pork is an important one. We have exports over 300 metric tons to the UK in 2019, and we're confident that this agreement maintains the market access conditions that will allow the pork sector to build on that. Beyond what my colleague has said, I would just note that the first come, first served methodology for the administration of TRQs has been in the past a key ask of the pork sector, and something that we pursued in the CIIT negotiations, and we're happy to have as an outcome in the TCA.
Thanks. I have one quick question.
Sorry, Mr. Lobb, your time is up.
Oh, Ms. Scroll.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
I know.
Ms. Vidalian, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question relates to the Memorandum of Understanding that we signed with the United Kingdom. From having spoken to some of our exporters and of course to our team in the Minister of International Trade's office, it seems that everybody is quite happy with the terms of the MOU that was agreed. Can you maybe give us an indication of what you're hearing from our exporters and how smooth the the exporting is for Canadian companies to the UK right now?
Pardon me. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And I think that that the MOU was seen as very helpful by businesses because it eliminated some of the uncertainty that would have happened as of December 31st as a result of not having the TCA in place as of that day. So I think very positive from that point of view. I think that what we have heard from Canadian companies exporting goods into that market is things are going well. There have been a few glitches, but they're not necessarily trade-related glitches. I think it's part of the overall challenges that the UK is having in terms of importing goods that they might not have had when they were part of the European Union. But I think those are kinks that will work themselves out. One of the things that is important to note with respect to the MOU is that it only covers goods, and so it doesn't cover the services, as I mentioned earlier. And so we don't have the entire agreement in place. But from a goods perspective, I think it is working very well thus far. But I might just ask my services colleague.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And of course, that is one of the reasons why it is important for us to act quickly in order to ratify the agreement. I hope that you can hear me, Madam Chair. There is a technical message coming up that my internet is unstable. My next question for the panel of witnesses is with respect to the industries that are here in Canada that might be able to benefit from this UK agreement. What opportunities do you see for some of our industries that might not have previously exported to the UK? Can you identify some of those industries perhaps for us here today?
Certainly, thanks for the question, Madam Chair. And I think certainly what we have seen from when we signed, the United Kingdom is our third largest export market. We have had a strong and stable bilateral trade relationship with them for a great number of years. I think it's more likely the case that we see ongoing opportunities in that marketplace, and we are certainly seeing them in the agriculture space, but also in the other commodities, wood products, and then in industrial products as well. I think from an opportunity standpoint, I think what we have heard from stakeholders is that the automotive sector remains very interested in the UK marketplace, especially as we turn now to electric vehicles. I think that there is a real opportunity for our automotive sector, not just in the UK, but also in the EU and around the world. So a lot of opportunity there for growing the bilateral relationship, continuing to make sure that it stays strong. But I'll turn to my colleague from AFC to see if he wanted to add.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree. I think this is an exercise largely in preserving the market access opportunities that our exporters have enjoyed into the United Kingdom market in recent years, including since the provisional application of the CITA. We see it as an important market. Our stakeholders see it as an important market. The European Union is the world's largest importer of agriculture and food, fish and seafood products, and fully 20% of Canada's recent exports of those products to Europe were destined to the United Kingdom, over $550 million worth of agricultural food and seafood products in 2019. And I think—
No, I understand that. I was asking for perhaps opportunities that the government could explore for new industries to be exporting to the UK.
Sorry, Ms. Medallion, your time is up. Maybe the witnesses could try to answer that along with some other member that might be interested in the same thing. On to Mr. Hoback, please.
Thank you, Chair. Gentlemen, our witnesses, please. I'm just kind of curious right now, how vulnerable are our trades going into the UK at this point in time without an agreement in place that's formalized?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I think from a goods perspective, I don't think they're vulnerable. I think we are covered by the memorandum of understanding that it provides for duty remission on Canadian exports into the UK marketplace for goods that would qualify under the TCA. So I think we're
that MOU then legally has standing in a court.
That's correct.
It does. Okay. And then is there anything in the agreement that legally forces both sides back to the table?
There are provisions. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. There are provisions in the agreement that that will, I'd say, strongly entice as opposed to compel both countries back to the table. The accumulation provision, very important provision for the United Kingdom. It will expire after 3 years, so December 31st, 2023, unless it is renewed. And similarly, the United Kingdom has expressed a strong interest in cheese access to Canada. We have provided them with the ability to access continue to access the European Union pool of our WTO quota that will expire after 3 years, and there is a provision in the agreement that provides for the launching of negotiations within a year, and then best efforts to finalize them within 3 years. So,
I don't mean to cut you off, Mr. Forsyth. 5 minutes is very short. So the MOU expires into March. Is there any way to get that extended if this should take longer to get through the Canadian Parliament? I understand the UK is finished, but
that's correct. Thank you for the question. The UK is finished, and the MOU does expire at the end of March. It does allow for it to be extended if necessary. So we do retain that.
So we have some time then.
Possibility.
Okay, and then I'm just kind of curious with TPP now coming into the line of sight here for both countries, what would be the type of things we'd like to get out of the UK in a bilateral agreement that we necessarily wouldn't achieve in TPP?
Thank you for the question.
TPP.
I knew what you meant. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
So there are, I think we will see certainly what happens. Where the interests of our stakeholders vis-a-vis the CPTPP versus the bilateral negotiations. So there are certain areas. I think there are. Are there areas in the bilateral where we could go farther than we would have under the CPTPP? For example, with respect to small businesses, with respect to digital trade, with respect to trade and gender, the environment. The one thing about the CPTPP is that as a plurilateral agreement, some of the provisions don't go as far as you might see in a bilateral agreement. We have completed since we have completed the CPTPP negotiations, we have also completed CUSMA negotiations. The world has changed a little bit in the last 3 years. So are there areas where we would want to go farther in the bilateral? I think we'll discover some of that as we do our analysis and as we hear from stakeholders through the consultation process.
So things like labor mobility, maybe financial, taxation, treaties, education opportunities, those are the types of things you'd look in a more of a services style bilateral agreement?
All of those things are certainly possible and would certainly be looked at before we launch negotiations. Absolutely.
Okay, so then there is some opportunities in a bilateral agreement that we necessarily wouldn't see in TPP. So there's a reason to do that. Now, I understood, if I remember is right, and it is a Friday, that they have to do a bilateral with us before they can actually go into CPTPP. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We have made it clear that the TCA, the Trade Continuity Agreement, is not sufficient to complete the bilateral negotiations in the context of the CPTPP. They would need to do more.
Okay. And then as far as gaining market access for other ag commodities, what are the things that we're going to be looking at that will allow us to gain that market access?
Well, I think thank you for the question. So I think in the context of the CPTPP, the UK wants to join, so they will need to prepare an offer for CPTPP members, a market access offer, and on which they would base their bilateral negotiations with other CPTPP members. So they will have areas where they could potentially go farther. We are certainly interested from a goods perspective in increasing some of the areas on the agriculture side of things where we did not achieve that in the bilateral context. So, we had talked earlier about beef and pork. Certainly those would be at the top of my list. But again, we would want to hear from all of our stakeholders before we were, to finalize a overall negotiating strategy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth. On to Mr. Dhaliwal for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, as you know, you've been here in beautiful British Columbia long before I got elected, and I represent the riding of Surrey Newton, and most of the businesses here, I mean, if you look at the community, it's a very diverse community. My question, Madam Chair, will be particularly from the perspective of British Columbia, to see which sectors, particularly in British Columbia, will be able to take the advantage of this new continuity agreement, and what are some of the provisions in that agreement that will help British Columbians prosper us.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. British Columbia produces some of the best products in Canada, including especially on the commodity side, whether it is timber and wood, whether it is fresh berries and other products, other agriculture products. So BC region will have opportunities to export products like that, similar to other regions across Canada. I think it's just a matter of recognizing that the UK market is an important market for British Columbia. I think that they have done it's my understanding, they have done a very good job of exporting into that market for the last number of years. Our Trade Commission service has helped connect companies from BC with their UK counterparts, and to help open up some of those opportunities. I expect that will continue. As I said, the UK market is our number 3 export market for Canadian exports. That means that companies all across Canada benefit from that marketplace.
Madam Chair, I would like to thank Mr. Forsyth for giving the outlook for British Columbia. Another question was raised, Madam Chair, during the debate on Bill C-18 in the Parliament, that this agreement will, or other agreements in general, would not help the small and medium-sized businesses. If we look at Surrey, Randeep is here, he will be able to agree that most of the businesses here are small and medium-sized businesses. Madam Chair, through you, I would like to know how it will help small and medium-sized businesses, and particularly how it will help the female entrepreneurs.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And so I think the agreement does, there are no specific provisions for the small and medium-sized enterprises, but it does allow them to access the provisions like other companies. And I think the other part of that is, though, that it's not just the government does open up the access, but then we need to help. We need to do as much as we can to help small and medium-sized enterprises, help women-owned businesses, help Aboriginal businesses to access what we have negotiated. And I think that's the bigger challenge that we are facing. It's not so much that the access is now open, as how to get businesses to that access. And we've been able to do that through our Trade Commissioner service, both here in Canada and around the world, and linking them opportunities, doing the best to help companies, and we'll continue to do that. Our website is there. Our folks are in the regions. Our folks are in market, and we're doing our best to make those connections to make sure that Canadian companies are both small and large are successful.
Madam Chair, our goal in the next 3 years is to achieve a bilateral trade between UK and Canada. What are some of the specific steps that the negotiators can take so as women, LGBTQ community and minority communities can take the full advantage of this forthcoming agreement?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And I think we will, I think what the best way to approach that is through the consultative process. And we really need to hear from small businesses, from LGBTQ businesses, from Aboriginal businesses, some of their concerns and how we can help out. And I think we will do that through the consultative process. We will consult far and wide to make sure that we have all of the appropriate information available to us, and it certainly will help inform our negotiating position and as we move on to the next steps with the Canada-UK bilateral agreement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forsyth. On to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Pourquoi dans
A question? Seeking clarification. Amongst all the products that are subject to supply management, why do we only have cheese being discussed in the agreement or in the side letter?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And so the Canada-UK agreement is a replication agreement of the CITA. And under the CITA, the only supply managed product that was part of the agreement was in fact cheese. Canada was very clear about that no other supply managed product would be part and parcel of that agreement. So that's why, given that it is a replication exercise, that's why we're only talking about cheese in the context of Canada-UK trade continuity agreement.
Mais y a-t-il une possibilité?
But is it possible to have increased imports of cheese from the UK as part of the tariff quotas of the World Trade Organization?
Est-ce que cette question...
Was that issue studied?
So thank you for the question. So I think there won't be any increased, there won't be any increased amount of cheese in the Canadian marketplace as a result of the Canada-UK TCA. Will there be more UK cheese? That is very much for Canadian importers to decide. They are the ones that have the quota, and when they will make their own business decisions in terms of deciding what they import. But the total amount of imported cheese coming into Canada will not change, but the makeup of it may.
La composition pourrait...
So the composition could change. The British has made it known clearly that it would be a priority during other negotiations, not so?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we have heard on many occasions from our UK counterparts that that cheese is an important export for them, not just in Canadian context, but around the world.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Forsyth. On to Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much. I think many of us. Many of us went.
Good morning.
Madam Chair, perhaps you want to
just hold on, Mr. Dhaliwal.
There, he's on mute
there
now,
it goes.
Madam Chair. Okay.
Apologize for the interruption, Mr. Blakey. Please start over.
When the agreement was announced, it came as a surprise to many of us that what had been touted as a transitional agreement didn't have any kind of sunset clause in it. So I know we've had this discussion at committee before, but now that the text of the agreement is public, the legislation is public, I wonder if you could delineate for the committee today as best you can in the very little amount of time that I have, but perhaps also you could table a letter to the committee that points out those aspects of the agreement that the Trade Department believes will ensure that a successor agreement is concluded by the end of the 3-year period, and that our trading partner, if they won't decide that they're content with the provisions of the TCA, which otherwise operates as a permanent trade agreement.
I'm certainly happy to do that, Madam Chair. We could certainly table what I have said today in terms of outlining some of those provisions. I just note that we can do that. Sure.
Thank you. Do you want to provide a little bit of comment today, just in terms of what you think those major points of leverage are, and then table something more detailed subsequent to today?
Well, thank you for the clarification. Yes, sorry, I heard the second part of the question, not the first. So I would just emphasize that that there are the provisions. There's the provision to go back to the negotiating table within 1 year, and the consultations will be part of that. I fully expect that we will be back at the negotiating table in 2021 with our UK counterparts. In addition to that, there is the best efforts to complete the negotiations within 3 years, so by the end of 2023, and we are certainly working towards that. On the Canadian side, I can't speak necessarily to the UK side, but certainly the Canadian side is gearing up to do that. When I speak with my UK counterparts, they are doing the same. In addition, and as I mentioned previously, there are the other provisions within the agreement that they don't necessarily force the UK back to the table, but they certainly are strong reasons for them to come back to the negotiating table. So on accumulation, that was a key ask for the UK. Those provisions will expire at the end of 3 years. So at the end of 3 years, they will not be able to use the EU materials. The EU materials will not count as material in the rules of origin context, and so they will lose preferential access. They will lose the ability to claim preferential duty under the Canada-UK TCA. So that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forsyth.
Thank you very much.
On to Mr. Lobb, please, for 5 minutes. Is Mr. Lobb with us? There you are.
Ms. Groh, can you hear me okay? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we hear you well.
Yes, please, go ahead.
That's great. Thanks. Okay, thanks to our guests again. I just want to throw out a question to Mr. Forsyth here. We had the minister in on Monday, and of course, we were talking about a different topic. Of course, we were talking about the vaccines and so forth. Does someone in your position, do you get to ever see the contracts that would be with a Pfizer or Moderna or AstraZeneca?
Well, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. No, I have never seen the contracts that exist between the drug companies and the government of Canada. No,
okay, it's way off topic for today, but I was just curious if you'd ever get a crack at it. Just in regards to beef, I know with pork, I think we still have some long-term issues with the trichonalia, but with beef, you've heard me say this before. I think it's very frustrating, somebody that lives in rural Ontario, to know that we have a trade deficit with the European Union and with the UK with beef. And what do you see? How can we address this situation? Because it's just, to me, it's ridiculous.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And I share your frustration. I share the sector's frustration with the inability to export to the European marketplace. So there are a couple of issues that are around that export, being able to export more beef. And first of all, in order to export more beef to the European marketplace, we need to have more hormone-free beef here, grow more hormone-free beef here in Canada in order to have larger supply to access that market, because the Europeans are not going to take non-hormone-free beef. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, we have to work with the sector. We have to figure out a way to on the processing side of things in order to have the Europeans understand some of the provisions that we use to process our beef. Okay, and I think we're working on that. We're working very closely with the sector on those aspects, and so I'm hopeful that those will come to fruition in the not too distant future.
And hopefully, I hopefully too, and I'm sorry to cut you off there a little bit. I would just hope that for a committee, we would put those in as recommendations to encourage the governments of the day for processing capacity, encourage beef growers and so forth to if they're interested in that sector, then to go for it.
Yes, thank you, and I would agree with that. I think it's an important sector, important market for the beef sector, and it has its challenges. And I think you see that as a result of they do take where's the beef go instead, and it goes to the United States, it goes to Japan, it goes to other easier markets. And as my colleague said, European market is the largest importer of food products. We need to do a better job of accessing that and making sure that our Canadian exporters can do that.
Is there any time left, Ms. Squirrel?
Mr. Lobb, you're still got 2 minutes.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to go back to the beans and pulses like we discussed at the beginning of my first round. I believe the Hensel Co-op ships about 40 containers a week. I think it's about 40 20-foot containers a week of white beans and other crops. I know through the years they've shipped corn and different wheat through there. So are there any opportunities for growers who would be listening today to take a look at what they're doing and kind of tailor their market to what the UK is needing right now?
I wonder if I might turn to my colleague from Agriculture Canada to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate the question. I think this agreement preserves important opportunities for producers of those commodities into the United Kingdom market following its exit from the CITA. In many cases, those opportunities have been explored during the period that the CITA has been provisionally applied. It is a market that is relatively well known, I think, to our agri-food exporters. They work closely with our agricultural trade commissioners in the market to examine and pursue opportunities, and I would encourage them to continue to do so. I think that this agreement maintains the access that they need to be successful in the United Kingdom, and the government is there to help them along the way.
Okay, maybe one last quick question, and it's in regards to labor and certification recognition. Obviously, Canada is a very strong nuclear energy sector, and I know the UK has many qualified nuclear workers as well. Many of them are actually living in my riding right now, I'm sure. So the question is in specialized work there, is there any way that we can make work visas, etc., easier? Is there anything in there? Is there anything we can do in a new agreement where nuclear workers or other workers that are highly skilled would be able to have an easier way for an employer to bring them to Canada or vice versa?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And I think the new agreement would provide opportunity to negotiate that. And I think I would encourage folks in your riding and others to make sure that through the consultative process they make their views known. But I would like to clarify one thing, and I might turn to my temporary entry/services colleague to see if I have missed anything on that answer.
Yes, hello. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. It's my first intervention today, so I'm glad you've asked a question on relating to services. As Mr. Forsyth was saying, in the eventual negotiations with the UK, we'll have the opportunity to certainly raise this issue with the UK on a reciprocal basis and seek to achieve greater market access for these very important high-skilled professionals. So we'll have an opportunity, and in the context of the FTA. But in the meantime, if there are associations or people that want to participate in the consultations that will come up and express their views, that would be really appreciated. That would facilitate our work to make sure that these people are on the list of professionals for which we will facilitate access in the future Canada-UK.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Sarai for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to take a little different turn. I think it's pretty conclusive here that we're protected under this interim agreement, and what we had before in CITA is what we have now, and with 98% access and going towards 99% free trade access. So I think things are well. What I would like to know is how can we increase products, particularly those farmed here in Surrey or in British Columbia, like blueberries and cherries. How can these are very high value added agriculture products that we can export to the UK under this agreement. And I'd like to know how much are we exporting right now, and if there's possibilities to increase those either under this agreement or in general. So if Mr. Forsyth or someone else can answer that.
Thank you very much for the question. And I would say there's always opportunities to increase our Canadian exports, but I will turn to my colleague from AFC specifically on blueberries and cherries.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the question. I'm afraid I'll have to get back to the member with an answer to that question. I don't have export stats broken down by commodity with me today. As I mentioned before, I think we exported about $550 million worth of agri-food products to the United Kingdom in 2019, and I'd be happy to provide more details on the product breakdown of those exports following this meeting.
Is there any initiative that after Export Development Canada or other federal government agencies would that promote trade would go to Canadian businesses and highlight the importance of this agreement, highlight opportunities perhaps that Canadians have not taken advantage of before, particularly perhaps procurement, other issues that were gained in CITA that maybe have not been taken advantage of by Canadian companies. Are there initiatives that are going on to increase that flow of trade from Canada or services?
Yes, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. And absolutely, I think there are, I guess there's two issues there. And one, it's the trade promotion issue, which I think we have my department, Global Affairs Canada, we do have a team in place to promote not just the Canada-EU agreement, the Canada-UK agreement, CPTPP, and elsewhere around the world in order to enhance the opportunities for Canadian companies to export, and especially, as I said earlier, especially the small businesses who may not have all the information at hand, may not have the expertise, and may not know the best way of the route to export. I think a lot of what we see is that a lot of our companies export to the U.S. It's not a surprise that 80% or around 80% of our exports go to the United States because it's the easiest market, right? But if we're going to diversify our trade and increase our exports, we'll have to reach beyond the United States market. And that's why the government is negotiating the free trade agreements, right? So we have the CITA, the Canada-UK, the CPTPP, and others that we're working on. And but once those negotiations are completed, we need to make sure that businesses, exporters, producers all know about them. And so we need to do a better job of promoting. As I said, we have a team from Global Affairs in place to do that. And then we need to help them too. And that's our Trade Commissioner Service, as I said, who work regionally across Canada, but then in market to help pathfind for companies, help identify opportunities, and help make business connections. And so I thank you for Madam Chair. Thank you for the question, and recognize that we need to do more to work with companies to make sure that the opportunities are available to them.
A very short question, Mr. Sarai.
Real quickly, as I think you've already stated, there are no provisions in this agreement that prevent or could, on an emergency basis, lock out any vaccine delivery to Canada.
That's correct. There are no. Yes, that's correct. What we had said, what witnesses had said earlier this week is as true for this agreement as it is for the other ones, CETA and WTO agreement.
So we're protected under that.
Sorry?
We're protected for deliveries under this agreement.
The agreement doesn't, well, I think the agreement, the trade agreement itself neither protects nor stops the deliveries from happening. I don't, I think it provides for the flow of goods between the two countries, duty-free flow of goods between countries, but so that to the extent that vaccines are covered by that, yes, it's covered.
Thank you, Mr. Forsyth. On to Ms. Gray for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Of course, we know that as we go into a successor agreement, that there aren't any penalties if Canada and the UK do not begin negotiations within a year. But the last time, Mr. Forsyth, that you were in front of the committee, you had mentioned that there may be specific parts of the agreement that the UK would want to get back to the table on as soon as possible. And so would each of those still apply if the UK is successful in joining the CPTPP, or would some of those have been addressed through that?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I'd have to give it some further thought, but I don't believe that there are. I mean, I think the reasons for the UK to come back to the table on a bilateral basis would continue to apply, regardless of the fact of if the CPTPP negotiations were ongoing or not.
Thank you. Would you be able to table that information, like what specifically those each of those topics would be, like what they are? Because I don't believe you've mentioned what they are. Is that something that you'd be able to table?
Well, I think, sorry, what I was referring to was the reasons for them to come back to the agreement are the same ones that a previous questioner asked me with respect to the commitment within 3 years to do so, the accumulation provision, and as well as the cheese provision. So those are the three reasons that they would want to come back to the table, because they will lose those, they will lose access to those provisions if the future agreement is not in place.
I see. Okay. Has the government named the chief negotiator for when Canada and the UK begin talks on the successor agreement?
No, they have not. No, not to my knowledge, they have not.
Do you have any indication when this person might be named?
No, I'm not sure. I think there'll be some internal discussion on that. Yes, it could well be me, but I haven't been informed of that yet.
Okay, fair enough. I wanted to ask just a little bit about the MOU. Do you know if I know that you had mentioned earlier that the MOU could be extended if for some reason it's not ratified by the March 31st date. But when were you first notified that Canada would not be able to ratify the Canada-UK Trade Continuity Agreement by the end of the CETA application to the UK?
Thank you for the question. If I understood correctly, when did I first?
When were you first notified that we weren't going to meet the timeline by the end of December 31st?
Was I first notified? Well, I mean, I think it became clear to me that we were not going to be able to meet that timeline in and around. I think maybe it was probably around the first time I came to appear before this committee. It was made clear by more than a few members that that there would not be enough time to review the agreement and provide the work that you needed to do that. So I think, what was that, towards the end of November?
Okay, so that was the first indication that you had that we weren't going to meet the timeline by the end of December 31st. You're saying would have been towards the end of November?
I think whenever it was, I can't recall the exact date when I was here when I first appeared before the committee. That's right.
Okay, so previous to that, you would have expected that we should have met the timeline by having ratification by the end of December 31st?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I don't know if I would have expected it. I think I would have hoped, but I think the Canadian Parliament needs to review the legislation, needs to review the bill, needs the time to do that. So, I'm all I can do is negotiate the agreement and present it as completed, and then parliamentarians need to take the time, committee members need to take the time to do their work. So.
A very short comment, Ms. Gray.
Well, I'll just, I don't think we have enough time for questions. So just, I'll just say that as we go into the next negotiations, it would be really imperative to have a wholesome consultation process with the public, with businesses and with workers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Gray. On to Ms. Badalian, please.
Pick up on that point with respect to a ratification process. In your experience working in trade, how long could a ratification process take for a given parliament? I would imagine that it does fluctuate, but do you have any?
Ms. Benayan,
Point of order, Madam Chair.
A sound problem. Il semble que nous ayons un problème de son.
Just hold on one second. We're seeming
okay. I think it's a boom problem.
Okay.
Boom problem.
It is solved.
All
yes.
right.
Apologies, especially to our hardworking translators. So the question to the witnesses was simply, in their experience, how long does a ratification process last? And I appreciate that it could take a different amount of time depending on the agreement. But I would imagine, given the process that a Canadian Parliament has to go through, that it would be something that would take several weeks, if not months. Is that your experience?
Yes, thank you for the question, Madam Chair, and definitely has been my experience that it varies. Certainly, a Canadian Parliament, each Parliament, in fact, needs to do their due diligence, needs to do their proper review of the agreements, and so it very much varies. We have our process in Canada; our trading partners have their process as well, and that varies also. So I think it's important that both countries parliamentarians do a thorough review of and take the time needed to do that, and then once that work is complete, and ratify and move on to entry into force. So as I said, it very much it varies.
Thank you. And I know that it doesn't pertain directly to C18. However, a number of other members have raised questions related to the UK's interest to join the CPTPP, and I was wondering if you could clarify for all of us the process involved for a country to join that multilateral agreement. It's my understanding that it is something that is complex. I was wondering if you can take us through that process.
Sure. Thank you for the question, and I can do it as best I can. It's that there is a formal process, and I think it starts with the application, like the formal indication. A number of countries have indicated informally that yes, they want to join, or they might want to join, or they're exploring, which is great. So once the country formally applies, then a working party is formed by all of the CPTPP members who have signed the agreement. So that does not include at this time Chile, Peru, Malaysia. So they're not part of the working party in order to do that. So the terms and conditions are laid out in the agreement about how things will proceed once the application has been submitted. They are and then I think I'll have to get back to you with the exact steps. There is a process. I just don't have them at my fingertips at the top of my head. So we can get back to you with that process.
Thank you. I would appreciate that. Madam Chair, do I have time for one more question?
Yes, you do. Please continue.
Merci. Alors, je voulais peut-être...
Let me ask a question on behalf of the businesses in my constituency, Montreal, Outremont. They are usually startups in the technology sector. So I wonder if you anticipate, either in the negotiations coming up or in this transitional agreement opportunities for technical startups or such types of businesses so we can expand our exports to the UK?
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair, and I sincerely hope so, that there will be that small businesses like that would want to take advantage of the Canada-UK trade agreement and the bilateral agreement that will follow. And said we need to hear from them. We need to hear from some of the challenges that they face and the opportunities that they see out there. And I think we could, we'll certainly be reaching out to companies and to people through the consultative process. So if you are aware of any businesses, please let us know so that we can flag them, put them on our list, and reach out to them. The growth of small, medium-sized enterprises is that's key to ensuring that our export diversification continues to happen and our exports continue to grow, and that startups are in not only in your riding but elsewhere around the country, important part of that. And so look forward to hearing from them. And
Merci.
Thank you. If someone wanted to take part in those consultations, if they're Canadians listening to us right now, how can they indicate their interest in participating in our consultations for this second agreement with the UK?
So there will be a, thank you for the question, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to clarify that there will be a website and a official launch process through Canada Gazette, but there will be a web link, et cetera, that will come out following that provides an address for folks. And at the end of the day, if anybody wanted to call me, they could call me, and I'd be happy to talk to them about that as well. So that is assuming if I'm named the chief negotiator.
All right. Thank you all very much. Being 2:57 at this particular moment, 2:58, I want to thank all of the witnesses for the very valuable information. We no doubt will be in touch in the next while as we have additional witnesses come before the committee as well. So thank you all, and thank you to committee members. I will work with the clerk to send out a proposed working schedule for how we might want to deal with C18 over the next several weeks. Please respond to it. If you're okay with it, please let us know. If you feel you would like to have additional meetings, please communicate back to us if that's all right with everyone. The clerk will be sending that out shortly, and I would appreciate your comments back. So thank you again to all of the committee members, to our translators, to our clerks. Take a few days rest now and come back better, stronger, and ready for the continued work we do on behalf of all Canadians. So thank you all very much. Move adjournment.
you.